The rain tasted like copper and ash the night I found Zephram bleeding out between the dumpsters. I wasn't supposed to be there. The alley behind the Moth and Candle bookshop was notorious for attracting the kind of trouble that left stains even industrial cleaners couldn't touch. But my cat, Periwinkle, a temperamental orange tabby with a vendetta against personal safety, had escaped again, and I'd followed the distant sound of his yowling into that narrow corridor of wet brick and forgotten dreams. What I found instead was a man. Not just any man. Even crumpled against the wall like discarded origami, he radiated something that made my Omega instincts scream in two different directions. Run and stay. His hair was the color of tarnished silver, long enough to pool in the dirty water collecting around him. Blood, so much blood, seeped from wounds I couldn't count in the dim light. His clothes, expensive even in tatters, clung to a frame that spoke of violence and victory in equal measure. His eyes opened as I approached. They were the strangest color I'd ever seen. Not quite purple, not quite gray like storm clouds at the edge of the world. Leave, he rasped, his voice carrying an alpha's command even as it broke on the word. I didn't leave. I'm Quillen Moth, yes, like the bookshop, it's been in my family for 4 generations, and I've never been good at following orders, even from alphas whose scent alone could probably make most Omegas swoon. Instead, I knelt in the puddle beside him, ignoring how the dirty water soaked through my favorite cardigan, and pressed my hands against the worst of his wounds. You're going to bleed out, I said, keeping my voice steady even as my hands shook. I'm calling an ambulance. His hand shot out, faster than someone dying should be able to move, and caught my wrist. His grip was iron-strong despite the trembling. No hospitals. They'll finish what they started. Then you'll die here. Better here than there. We stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills that I was determined to win. Up close, I could see his face properly, sharp cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least twice, lips pressed thin against pain. He was beautiful in the way disasters are beautiful. Terrible and magnetic and impossible to look away from. My apartment is above the shop, I heard myself say. I have medical supplies. Basic ones, but why? The question came out strangled, suspicious. I thought about lying. Thought about saying something noble about the sanctity of life or the Omega instinct to nurture. Instead, I told him the truth, because I found you and now you're my problem until you're not dying anymore. That's how it works. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect. You're insane. Probably. Can you walk? He couldn't, not really. It took 15 agonizing minutes to get him up the back stairs to my apartment, his arm heavy across my shoulders, his blood leaving a trail I'd have to clean before it stained. Periwinkle sat on the landing, watching our progress with feline judgment, before disappearing into the apartment ahead of us. My home was small, a studio with books stacked on every available surface, plants hanging in the windows, and a pervasive smell of old paper and the vanilla candles I burned to mask it. I'd never brought an alpha here before. I'd barely brought anyone here before. I deposited Zephram, I didn't know his name yet then, on my bed, which was really just a mattress on a low frame, covered in a patchwork quilt my grandmother had made. He slumped back against the pillows, his silver hair spreading like mercury against the floral fabric, and closed his eyes. Don't you dare die on my quilt, I said, already gathering supplies. It's an heirloom. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh or might have been pain. Noted. I'd taken a wilderness first aid course once, thinking it would be useful for the hiking trips I never actually went on. Now, as I cleaned wounds that were clearly made by knives and possibly claws, I sent a silent thank you to past Quillen for that moment of optimistic preparation. He didn't scream, though he should have. Instead, he watched me work with those strange eyes, his jaw tight enough that I worried about his teeth. When I had to dig out what looked like a silver fragment from his shoulder, he finally made a sound, a low growl that rattled in his chest and made every Omega instinct I possessed sit up and take notice. Sorry, I murmured, not sure why I was apologizing for trying to save his life. Don't be. His voice was rough as gravel. You have steady hands for someone who smells like fear. I'm not afraid. Liar. He was right, of course. I was terrified. But not of him exactly. Of the situation. Of the blood. Of whatever had done this to him and might come looking to finish the job. It took 2 hours to clean and bandage everything. By the end, my hands were cramping and he drifted into something between sleep and unconsciousness. His fever was rising. I could feel the heat radiating off him even from a foot away. I covered him with a spare blanket, turned off the main light, and collapsed in my reading chair by the window. Periwinkle jumped into my lap, purring like he hadn't just led me into the most dangerous decision of my life. You, I told him, are a terrible influence. He head-butted my chin in response. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the stranger was awake and watching me with an intensity that should have been unsettling but instead felt oddly safe. "You're still here?" he said. "It's my apartment. You could have left. Gone to a hotel. Called the police." "I could have," I agreed. "Didn't want to." He studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling of being catalogued, assessed, filed away in whatever organizational system his mind used. "What's your name?" "Quillen. Quillen Moth." "Moth?" he repeated like he was tasting the word. Fitting for a creature drawn to dangerous things. "What's yours?" Pause. "Zephram Night Hollow." The name hit me like a slap. I'd heard it before, whispered in the bookshop by customers who thought I wasn't listening, mentioned in news articles I'd skimmed about organized crime and territorial disputes in the underbelly of our city. Zephram Night Hollow, the alpha who controlled the southern districts, the man other criminals feared, the shadowy figure who supposedly answered to no one. I just brought the most dangerous man in the underworld into my apartment and bandaged his wounds. "Oh," I said faintly. "Ah." His lips quirked. "You've heard of me. Should I be more terrified than I already am?" "Probably." He shifted, wincing at the movement. "But you're still here." "Still my apartment," I pointed out, trying to keep my voice light even as my heart raced. "Are you going to kill me? If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead." He said it matter-of-factly, without malice. "Besides, I owe you a life debt now. That's not something my kind takes lightly." "Your kind?" "Alphas of the old blood." He touched his chest, where the worst of the wounds hid beneath bandages. "We have rules, codes. When someone saves our life, we're bound to them until the debt is repaid." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound came out slightly hysterical. "I don't want a life debt from a crime lord. I just didn't want you to die in the alley." "Nevertheless." His eyes gleamed in the dim light. "You have it. Which means I'm your problem, as you so eloquently put it, until I decide we're even." The next 3 days were among the strangest of my life. Zephram was a terrible patient, restless, stubborn, and prone to trying to get up and leave despite the fact that he could barely make it to the bathroom without my help. But he was also surprisingly easy company when he wasn't bleeding or growling at his own weakness. He read my books without asking permission, sprawled across my bed with the kind of unself-conscious grace that made my mouth go dry. He argued with me about literature, philosophy, the correct way to brew tea. He tolerated Periwinkle with more patience than I expected, even when the cat decided Zephram's hair was a toy. "Your cat is deranged," he observed on the second day as Periwinkle attempted to groom his eyebrows. "He likes you. That says concerning things about his judgment." I was making soup, nothing fancy, just vegetables and broth from a carton, when he finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why did you really help me, Quillen?" I kept my eyes on the pot, watching steam curl toward the ceiling. "I told you. I found you and I became your problem." "Yes, but you could have called the authorities. You could have walked away. You could have done a dozen things that wouldn't have involved bringing a dying alpha into your home." He was quiet for a moment. "So why?" I turned off the stove, ladled soup into 2 bowls, brought them to where he sat propped up against my headboard, and handed him one before settling cross-legged at the foot of the bed with mine. "When I was younger," I said slowly, "I was attacked by an alpha. Nothing like what you're thinking. But bad enough. Afterward, everyone said the same thing. That's just how alphas are. Aggressive, dominant, dangerous. Like it was a force of nature, not a choice." Zephram's expression was unreadable, but he'd gone very still. "I stopped believing that was true," I continued. "I stopped believing that people are just their nature. And when I found you in that alley bleeding out, you could have commanded me. Your alpha voice could have made me do whatever you wanted. But you told me to leave. You tried to protect me from whatever danger you represented, even though you were dying." I met his eyes. "So I guess I helped you because you seemed like someone worth saving. Someone who makes choices instead of excuses." The silence stretched between us, thick with words neither of us knew how to say. "You're a strange omega," Zephram finally said, his voice rough. "You're a strange alpha." His laugh was soft, genuine. "Fair." On the 4th day they came looking for him. I was downstairs in the bookshop, helping a customer find a first edition of something obscure, when I felt it. A shift in the air, a wrongness that made my instincts scream. 3 alphas entered, their sense sharp with aggression and intent. They didn't browse. Didn't pretend to be interested in books. "We're looking for someone," the leader said. He was tall, broad, with scars that suggested a lifetime of violence. Silver hair, purple eyes. Would have been injured. Seen anyone like that? My customer, an elderly beta woman, quickly excused herself. I couldn't blame her. "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. You're welcome to look around, but as you can see, it's just me and the books. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that promised terrible things. You're lying. I can smell it. And I can smell him. His scent is all over you. My heart hammered against my ribs. I don't know what you're. The Alpha grabbed my wrist, fast as a snake strike, and yanked me toward him. His grip was bruising, painful. Where? Night Hollow. Right here. Zephram's voice came from the stairs, cold and sharp as a blade. He descended slowly, deliberately, despite the fact that he was still healing, still weak. But you wouldn't know it from looking at him. He radiated power, danger, and authority that filled the small shop like smoke. The Alpha holding me released my wrist immediately and stepped back. You should be dead, Zephram, he said, trying for bravado and not quite achieving it. I'm difficult to kill. You should know that by now, Creve. Zephram reached the bottom of the stairs and positioned himself between me and the intruders. Touch him again and you won't leave this shop alive. Creve's eyes darted between us, calculating. Him? You're protecting an Omega bookshop owner? The great Zephram Night Hollow brought low by. Choose your next words carefully, Zephram interrupted, his voice dropping into a register that made my Omega instincts want to submit and my human brain want to hide behind something solid. I've killed for less. The other two Alphas looked ready to run. Creve held his ground barely. Corvith wants you dead. This doesn't end until... Tell Corvith that if he wants me, he knows where to find me. But if he sends lackeys to harass innocent shopkeepers, I'll take it as a declaration of war. And he knows how that will end. It was a bluff, it had to be. Zephram was in no condition to fight anyone, let alone wage war. But he sold it with such absolute conviction that even I half believed it. Creve must have believed it too because he nodded once, sharp and angry, and gestured to his companions. They left without another word, the bells above the door chiming cheerfully in their wake. The moment they were gone, Zephram's legs buckled. I caught him barely. For someone so graceful, he was surprisingly heavy. We sank to the floor together, his back against the counter, my arms around him to keep him upright. You idiot, I hissed. You should be in bed. You're barely healed. What if they'd actually fought you? They wouldn't have. He was breathing hard, pain etched into every line of his face. Creve is a coward. He only fights battles he knows he can win. But if you're wrong, I'm not. He turned his head to look at me, and we were so close I could see flecks of silver in his purple-gray eyes. I couldn't let them hurt you, Quillen. Do you understand? The life debt, the codes I live by, they wouldn't have mattered. I would have protected you anyway. My breath caught. Why? I'm still figuring that out. We stayed like that, tangled together on the bookshop floor, until his breathing evened out and he had the strength to stand again. That night I told him he had to leave. It's not safe, I said, pacing my small apartment while he watched from the bed. They know you're here now. They'll come back probably with more people. You need to go somewhere secure, somewhere. You're right, he interrupted quietly. I stopped pacing. I am? You are. I've put you in danger just by being here. It was selfish to stay as long as I have. He stood, moving more easily than he had in days, and began gathering his things, which amounted to his ruined clothes and the weapons I'd found in his pockets, and politely pretended not to notice. I should have felt relieved. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? My life back, my safe little bubble restored. Instead I felt hollow. Zephram. You saved my life, Quillen Moth, he said, his back to me. I won't repay that by getting you killed. The debt still stands. When you need me, I'll come. Until then, it's better if I'm not here. What if I don't want you to go? The words escaped before I could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. He turned, and the look on his face was something I couldn't name. Hope maybe. Or fear. Don't, he said softly. Don't say things like that unless you mean them. My world is violent, Quillen. It's dark and bloody and full of people like Creve who would hurt you just to hurt me. You deserve better than. What if I get to decide what I deserve? I crossed the room until I stood in front of him, close enough to feel the heat of him, to see the way his pupils dilated as he caught my scent. You're an Omega, he said like I might have forgotten. I'm the most dangerous Alpha in this city. We don't make sense. Nothing about the past 4 days has made sense, I countered. But they happened anyway. You happened. And I'm not sorry. Quillen. I'm not asking you to stay forever. I'm not even asking you to stay tonight. I'm just asking you not to disappear like this was nothing. Like I'm nothing. His hand came up, cupped my face with a gentleness that contradicted everything I'd heard about him. You're not nothing. He stopped, struggled with words. You're the person who saw me dying and decided I was worth saving. You're the person who argues with me about books and makes terrible soup and has a deranged cat. Yours? I offered, only half joking. The word hung between us, dangerous and sweet. I can't promise safety, he said finally. I can't promise normal. But if you want me, Quillen, then yes. I'm yours, and you're mine. And we'll figure out the rest as we go. I kissed him. It wasn't graceful or practiced or anything like the kisses I'd read about in the romance novels I secretly loved. It was clumsy and tentative and tasted like antiseptic and hope. But when he kissed me back, careful of his still healing injuries, his hands tangling in my hair, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Your life is about to get very complicated, he warned. It was already complicated, I said. I have a cat who stages prison breaks and a bookshop that barely turns a profit. What's a little danger? He laughed, and the sound was light, unburdened. Beautiful. We didn't have sex that night, despite what the romance novels would suggest. He was still healing and I was still processing the fact that I'd apparently decided to, be bonded to? The terminology escaped me, but the feeling didn't. Instead, we lay on my too small bed, his arms around me, his chin resting on my head, and talked until dawn painted the windows gold. About his life, the parts he could tell me without putting me in more danger. About my shop, my dreams, the thesis I'd abandoned in graduate school about the intersection of folklore and commerce. About the strange, impossible thing growing between us. Periwinkle slept on Zephram's chest, purring like a motorboat. I have to leave in the morning, Zephram said as the first birds began their chorus outside. There are things I need to handle. People I need to deal with. Creve. And his employer. This doesn't end until Corvith understands that I'm not as vulnerable as he thinks. That attacking me was a mistake. Fear coiled in my stomach. Will it be dangerous? Yes. He didn't lie to me and I appreciated that. But I'm very good at dangerous. It's kind of my specialty. And after? When it's done? His arms tightened around me. If you'll have me, I'll come back. We can figure out what this is, what we are. Together. I'll have you, I said simply. Even if you're terrible at taking care of yourself and have a concerning number of enemies. And you're an Omega who saves dying alphas and argues about Dostoevsky at 3 a.m. We're both ridiculous. Match made in heaven. Or hell. Tomato, tomato. He kissed the top of my head and I felt him smile against my hair. When the sun fully rose, he left. But this time it felt different. Not like an ending but like a promise. The next 2 weeks were quiet. Too quiet. I ran the shop, fed Periwinkle, and tried not to jump every time the door opened. No alphas came looking for Zephram. No threats materialized. It was so normal it made me anxious. I did receive gifts though. Strange ones. A first edition of a book I'd mentioned wanting, delivered by a courier who vanished before I could ask questions. A new security system for the shop, installed overnight by people I never saw. Fresh flowers on my doorstep every morning, not roses or lilies but unusual blooms I had to look up. Night blooming cereus, ghost orchids, black dahlias. Each one came with a note in sharp, elegant handwriting. Still alive. Still yours. See. On the 15th day he appeared in my shop just before closing. He looked different. Still dangerous, still beautiful, but lighter somehow. Like a weight had been lifted. His wounds had healed, leaving scars I wanted to trace with my fingers. He wore a long black coat that probably cost more than my monthly revenue, and his silver hair was pulled back in a way that showed his face fully. Hi, I said, eloquent as ever. Hi yourself. He approached slowly, giving me time to process, to run if I wanted. I didn't run. It's done. Corvith won't be a problem anymore. Is he? Alive if that's what you're asking. But exiled, stripped of his territory and resources. He broke codes, tried to kill me outside of formal challenge. The other alphas of the old blood didn't take kindly to that. I absorbed this information, trying not to think too hard about the mechanics of underworld justice. And you? Are you safe? Safer than I've been in years. He reached the counter, leaned against it. My position is secure. My people are loyal. And I have something I didn't have before. What's that? A reason to come home at night. My heart did something complicated in my chest. That's a terrible line. I know. I've been practicing in my head for 3 days and it's the best I could come up with. I'm better at threatening people than romancing them. Lucky for you, I find your complete lack of game charming. He grinned, sudden and devastating. Does that mean you're willing to give this a real chance? You and me, navigating the complicated mess of my life and your bookshop and whatever this thing is between us. I came around the counter, stood in front of him, close enough to see my reflection in his strange eyes. I saved your life in an alley. You owe me, remember? I remember. Then here's how you repay the debt. You show up. You be honest with me. You let me be part of your life, even the dangerous parts. And you promise that no matter how complicated it gets, we figure it out together. That's a tall order. You're a crime lord. You can handle it. He pulled me closer, his hands settling on my waist. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. I'm going to be overprotective and controlling and probably drive you insane. I'm going to call you out when you are. I'm going to be stubborn and argumentative and refuse to be protected when I don't want to be. I'm going to worry about you constantly. I'm going to worry about you too. I love you, he said, and the words sounded like they'd been torn from somewhere deep inside him. I know it's too soon, I know it doesn't make sense, but I love you, Quillen Moth. I think I have since you told me I was your problem. I should have been scared. Should have been cautious. Should have protected my heart. Instead, I kissed him, there in the bookshop surrounded by stories of love and adventure and impossible things. And when I pulled back, I said the truest thing I'd ever said, I love you too. Even though you're terrible at following medical advice and have questionable taste in enemies. We're really doing this? We're really doing this. And we did. It wasn't easy. His world collided with mine in ways that were sometimes painful, often strange, and occasionally terrifying. There were nights he came home with blood on his clothes that wasn't his own. There were mornings I woke to find him gone, called away to handle situations he couldn't explain. There were arguments about safety, about boundaries, about what I could and couldn't know. But there were also quiet evenings reading together, his head in my lap while I played with his silver hair. There were lazy mornings where he made breakfast, he was a surprisingly good cook, while Periwinkle supervised from the counter. There were inside jokes and shared glances and the slow, steady building of a life together. 6 months after I found him dying in the alley, Zephram moved into the apartment above the shop. His people, I'd met some of them by then, a diverse collection of alphas, betas, and omegas who respected him with an intensity that was almost frightening, thought he was insane. An alpha of his status, living in a studio apartment above a bookshop? But he did it anyway. For me. We merged our lives in strange ways. His security team became regular customers, buying books with the same seriousness they applied to everything else. My shop became a neutral meeting ground for some of his business dealings. There was something about being surrounded by books that made even hardened criminals more civil. I learned the codes he lived by, the old ways that governed alphas of his kind. He learned about first editions and proper tea steeping times and how to coexist with a cat who had declared himself the apartment's true ruler. And at night, when the city settled into its uneasy sleep and we lay tangled together in my too small bed, he would trace the lines of my face and tell me I was the best decision he'd ever made. Even though I'm bossy and stubborn and sometimes correct you in public? I'd ask. Especially because of that, he'd say. You're the only person who sees me as just Zephram. Not a crime lord. Not an alpha. Just me. You are just you, I'd remind him. The rest is just context. 1 year after the alley he proposed. Not with a ring, that would have been too conventional. Instead he gave me a key. Old brass ornate. It's to a building I bought, he explained, nervous in a way I'd never seen him. 4 stories, good location, lots of space. Big enough for the bookshop to expand downstairs, and an actual apartment upstairs. With separate rooms. And a garden on the roof for your plants. Zephram. And I know I should have asked first, but I saw it and I thought about our future and I wanted to give you something that wasn't connected to my world. Something that was just ours and... Zephram. He stopped, looked at me with those storm cloud eyes. Yes, I said. To the building, to a future, to whatever you're actually asking. I'm asking you to bond with me, he said quietly. Officially. The old way, the way alphas of my kind do it. I'm asking you to be my mate, my partner, my everything. I'm asking you to choose this life, choose me, knowing all the complications that come with it. I took the key. Felt its weight in my palm. I chose you the night I found you bleeding in the alley, I said. I chose you every day after. This doesn't change anything except making it official. We bonded on the spring equinox, in the apartment above the bookshop, with only Periwinkle as our witness. It was private, sacred, perfect. His bite on my neck was a promise and my acceptance of it was an answer. The Underworld adjusted to the fact that their most feared alpha was bonded to an Omega bookshop owner. Some thought it made him weak. They learned quickly that they were wrong. If anything, having something to protect made him more dangerous, more ruthless with those who threatened what was his. And I learned that being bonded to Zephram Night Hollow meant being protected, yes, but also being respected. His people became my people. His world became my world. And slowly I realized that I wasn't just surviving in it, I was thriving. 2 years after the alley, the new bookshop opened. Moth and Candle 2.0 was everything the original wasn't. Spacious, well-lit, with a cafe in the corner and reading nooks scattered throughout. Upstairs, our apartment was warm and lived in, full of books and plants and the subtle scent of two people building a life together. Zephram stood at the grand opening, uncomfortable in the spotlight but there because I'd asked him to be. His people had shown up too, dangerous alphas and betas browsing the stacks, making the other customers nervous until they realized these scary people were just buying romance novels and science fiction. "You did it," Zephram murmured, his arm around my waist as we watched people explore. "Built something beautiful." "We did it," I corrected. "You made this possible." "You made me possible," he said and kissed my temple. Periwinkle, now elderly and even more imperious, supervised from his throne, a custom cat bed Zephram had commissioned that cost more than most people's furniture. That night, after everyone left and we were cleaning up, I found Zephram in the alley behind the shop. The same alley where I'd found him, though it was cleaner now, safer. He was standing in the spot where he'd been dying, looking thoughtful. "What are you doing?" I asked, joining him. "Remembering," he said. "That night I thought I was finished. Thought Creve had finally done what a dozen others had tried and failed to do. I was ready to die in this alley, alone and unmissed. But you didn't. But I didn't. Because a strange Omega with terrible survival instincts found me and decided I was worth saving." He turned to me and even after 2 years the intensity of his gaze still made my breath catch. "You gave me a life, Quillen. Not just by bandaging my wounds but by showing me what living could be. What it meant to have someone who chose me not because of what I could do or who I was, but just because they wanted to." "You make it sound so noble," I said, stepping into his embrace. "I just didn't want you to bleed on the alley." "Liar," he said affectionately. "You're still a terrible liar. And you're still terrible at being a patient. We're perfect for each other. Absolutely ridiculous together. That too." We stood there, in the place where our story began, and I thought about the strange path that had led us here. How a dying alpha and a stubborn omega had found each other in the worst possible circumstances and made it work anyway. How we built something real from blood and stubbornness and the kind of love that didn't make sense on paper but felt inevitable in practice. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Bonding with me? Giving up the freedom to—" "Never," he interrupted firmly. "Not once. Not ever. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Quillen Moth. My mate. My home. My reason. Even though I drag you to book launches and make you socialize? Especially because of that." We went back inside together, to our apartment above the shop, to Periwinkle demanding his dinner, to the life we'd built from impossible circumstances. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the city settled and we lay together in the darkness, Zephram would trace the bond mark on my neck and whisper, "Thank you for saving me." And I would always answer, "Thank you for being worth saving." It wasn't the love story anyone expected. Not the underworld boss who fell for a bookish omega, not the happily ever after built on blood and literature. But it was ours, strange and sweet and different from anything else in circulation. And that, I thought, was exactly how it should be. Years later, when people asked how we met, Zephram would smile that dangerous smile and say, "He found me in an alley and decided I was his problem." And I would add, "Best problem I ever solved." Because in the end, that's what love was. Choosing someone again and again and deciding they were worth the complications. Worth the danger. Worth everything. I'd chosen Zephram Night Hollow on a rainy night in a dirty alley, and I'd keep choosing him every day after. He was my alpha. My mate. My strange, dangerous, wonderful love. And I was his omega. His bookkeeper. His home. Together we were absolutely ridiculous. Together we were perfect. The end.